Evidently, Father often used a mirror to get the fire-eaten eyes as the sparkling expression of Santa Claus.
Thomas Nast, the father of the American political cartoon and the creator of the classic American Santa Claus, was born and spent the first 6 years of his life in the German town of Landau, located in what was then the Rhenish Palatinate. Looking at contemporary scenes of Landau, we see picture book images that might easily be used to highlight a tourist pamphlet. The immaculate formal gardens and the peaceful fountains seem to suggest that this village has always been inhabited by well-fed burghers who are secure both economically and spiritually. The majestic medieval churches are symbols of inviolability and continuity that imply a history of harmony and prosperity. But the magnificently carved altars that attest to superb craftsmanship and unwavering faith conceal a tale of political and social upheaval that drastically altered conditions in mid-19th century Germany. By the 1830s, the Industrial Revolution was transforming the German landscape and rending the social fabric throughout the country. On September 27, 1840, in the midst of rising economic and political tension, Thomas Nast was born into a poor military family. His father was a trombonist for the 9th Bavarian Regimental Band, and Thomas spent the first 6 years of his life sharing overcrowded quarters with his 5 brothers and sisters in the Landau barracks. Conditions in Germany were steadily deteriorating, and for many, including a career military musician, immigration to America was the only alternative. We can well imagine Thomas's shock and wonderment upon the family's arrival in New York City in the summer of 1846. For a 6-year-old boy who spoke not a word of English, the sights and sounds of New York City in the steamy summer heat must have been overwhelming. But Thomas was not alone in his bewilderment. New York City in the mid-19th century was teeming with newcomers who were rapidly transforming the once serene village of Dutch immigrants into a restless, overcrowded metropolis. As the family moved from residence to residence, Thomas attended a succession of neighborhood schools. His scholastic performance was consistent in all of them. He was a remarkably poor student. But his inability to master the fundamentals of reading and writing was counterpoised by his precocious ability to express himself by drawing.
Right. He was about 14 when he did that. I think he was going to night school.
In 1854, Thomas's father died, and Thomas was forced to contribute to the financial well-being of his family. Gathering a bundle of his best drawings, Thomas called on Frank Leslie, the owner of Leslie's Illustrated newspaper, and asked for employment. He was hired at $4 per week. He was 15 years old at the time. Young Nast spent 4 years working for Leslie. Then, in 1859, he joined the New York Illustrated News.
Yes, he went to England to make sketches of the international fight of Heenan and Sayers in London.
During the voyage, he completed a series of sketches portraying life at sea. Following the accepted custom of illustrators in his day, Thomas included himself in the pictures. Although he was young and handsome, he curiously persisted in picturing himself as a short, dumpy child. Upon his arrival in England, Thomas took the opportunity to record his impressions of the city's inhabitants. As the date of the fight approached and the excitement increased, Thomas was introduced to both the American champion, Heenan, and to the English champion, Sayers. The fight, which took place on April 17, 1860, was a bare-fisted, bloody brawl. For 20, 30, and finally through 40 rounds, the combatants battered each other with countless blows. Mercifully, in the 42nd round, the police stepped in and stopped the pugilists. To no one's satisfaction, the fight was declared a draw.
From London, he went to be with Garibaldi to make sketches during the campaign in Italy.
Thomas caught up with Garibaldi in Sicily and was immediately seized by the spirit and passion of the great liberator and his followers. He quickly abandoned any notion of covering the conflict as a detached observer. He became one of Garibaldi's legion. Marching with Garibaldi's 1,000 heroes, Thomas recorded their battles and victorious processions through Palermo, Messina, Salerno, and finally to Naples, where the cheering crowds expressed their adoration as Garibaldi and Victor Emmanuel clasped hands and united Italy. It was the winter of 1860, and Thomas Nast was 20 years old. He returned home to New York City and his fiancée, Sarah Edwards, whom he married 9 months later. On April 13, 1861, secessionist shore batteries opened fire on Fort Sumter. The War of the Rebellion had begun. Initially, the war was disastrous for the North. By the fall of 1861, General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia lay within sight of Washington, and panic swept through the capital. In an attempt to revive the sagging morale of his army, President Lincoln appointed the young and popular General George McClellan as Commander-in-Chief of the Army of the Potomac. Through 1862 and the spring and summer of 1863, the war dragged on indecisively. Dividing his time between the battlefields and his home in New York City, Nast recorded the action for his new employer, Harper's Weekly. Nast sensed that his extraordinary artistic talent could be used to bolster the morale and commitment of the Northern people. Using his battlefield sketches to create emblematic drawings that were widely circulated in Harper's Weekly, he produced a series of allegorical images that overwhelmingly stirred support for the Union cause. The sentiments aroused by these drawings assisted President Lincoln, who was deeply alarmed that public support of the war effort was eroding as the numbers of killed and wounded mounted. Repeatedly in his speeches and executive acts, Lincoln justified the sacrifice and the suffering as acts of moral obligation. The war would no longer be waged to simply put down the rebellion, for at stake was the most sacred of human rights, the right of freedom from slavery. As in Italy, Nast was not simply a disinterested reporter. The drawings, notes, and photographs in his personal scrapbook express in vivid terms and images his belief that the sacrifice of life for the Union cause was necessary. To a remarkable extent, his drawings captured the carnage and chaos that shocked the young soldiers who had recently left home dreaming of glory and adventure. The dual Union victories of Vicksburg and Gettysburg on July 4, 1863, checked the Confederates' advance, but did little to soften their resolve. Mr. Lincoln needed a commanding general who understood the type of war that must be fought, who would not hesitate to commit thousands more to their deaths. He found such a general in the man who had commanded Federal troops to victory at Vicksburg. General Ulysses S. Grant knew what was necessary for Union victory. More importantly, he was prepared to command that it be done. General Grant took command in February 1864 and quickly implemented a three-pronged attack. He directed General Sherman to capture Atlanta and march to the sea, General Sheridan to sweep through the Shenandoah Valley, while Grant himself would besiege Lee's army holding Richmond.
Well, he went down there in the cause of the North, and President Lincoln said that he was the greatest recruiting sergeant the North had.
It took another year of bloodshed, but by the spring of 1865, General Grant's offensive strategy was completed. Lee's army abandoned Richmond on April 2nd in a last desperate attempt to escape. He was immediately surrounded, and on April 9th, 1865, he surrendered to Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse. This war had involved the total population, even those who never saw a battlefield. America's first mass circulation journals employed artists such as Thomas Nast and Winslow Homer to provide their readers with graphic accounts of the conflict.
Father, when he painted that picture, never called it the surrender. He called it peace and union.
The war was at an end, but the bitter peace of 1866 was of little consolation to either side. Thomas Nast and other supporters of republicanism were passionate in their belief that the moral objectives of the war should not be conceded during the peace. Full emancipation and the enfranchisement of blacks, as well as retribution toward Southerners who opposed these goals, were the demands of those who waved the bloody shirt. Through the summer and fall of 1867, Nast prepared a series of 33 historical paintings, each approximately 8 feet high and 12 feet wide, which he called his Grand Caricaturama. The paintings were offered as a visual lampoon of historical and contemporary personages, both real and fictional. He portrayed America's past through the Civil War, as well as issues of the current time in which President Andrew Johnson received special attention. The Grand Caricaturama was presented as a moving panorama set on stage with musical accompaniment and explanatory lecture. These paintings are especially significant in that they reflect Nast's experimentation with stylistic and thematic changes. His allegorical drawings of the earlier Civil War period were supplanted by works of keen caricatural insight. Nast continued to refine this technique, becoming the American master of caricature and pictorial parody. In uncompromising terms, he identified the Republican Party and its Reconstruction policies with wartime loyalty and patriotism, and cast the opponents of these policies as traitors and villains. Ulysses S. Grant was therefore portrayed as the country's savior, while Andrew Johnson had the dubious role of despoiler. In 1868, a triumphant President Grant attributed his slim margin of victory to two factors: the sword of General Sheridan and the pencil of Thomas Nast. At the age of 28, Thomas Nast had sketched his way to a position of influence and celebrity. But he was not content to use his power sparingly. Toward the end of 1869, Nast launched his celebrated attack on Boss Tweed and the ring of Tammany Hall. Even by today's standards, the power and the corruption of Tweed's political machine was staggering. From the ring's ascension to power in 1866 until its demise in 1871, an estimated $200 million was plundered from the public treasury of New York. To insulate themselves from prosecution, Tweed and his gang of freebooters stuffed municipal ballot boxes and packed the court benches of New York. Against this awesome opponent stood two tireless challengers, the New York Times and Thomas Nast. By 1871, the Times editorials and the caustic barbs of Nast's unforgettable cartoons had struck their mark and toppled the ring. The boss lay amid the debris of his once mighty empire, and Thomas Nast's prestige soared above the rubble of a dismantled Tammany Hall.
And Tweed used to say he didn't care what they wrote about him, but the Nast cartoons he couldn't stand.
Although Nast was a champion of emancipation and enfranchisement for black Americans and Chinese immigrants, his tolerance did not extend to Irish Catholics. His opposition to church intrusion in the affairs of state and the use of public money for private schools led him into open conflict with the Catholic Church and papal power.
He originated, I think it was the Democratic donkey first, and then the Republican elephant.
Another victim of Nast's caustic drawings was Horace Greeley, the influential founder of the New York Tribune. Greeley, who at times was an outspoken advocate of the Democratic Party, had deluded himself that his journalistic prowess could be translated into political success. In 1872, Greeley ran for president against Ulysses S. Grant. To Nast, Greeley was a man too closely associated with the unsavory aroma of Tammany Hall. Throughout the campaign, Nast bombarded Greeley with a barrage of vicious cartoons that proved devastating. 3 weeks after the election, a defeated and broken Horace Greeley died. Following his successful challenge of Boss Tweed and his crucial role in the re-election of Ulysses S. Grant, Nast was able to reap the rewards of his popularity. In the early 1870s, Nast lent his name to a short-lived series of illustrated almanacs. The publications contained children's stories that were enlivened by Nast's work. In Nast's version of Little Red Riding Hood, appearing in 1872, the little girl's lamb masqueraded as the wolf, which led to considerable confusion and alarm. Fortunately, no one was actually killed or consumed. Nast illustrated many popular children's stories and also contributed to the creation of children's games. Uncle Sam's Panorama, which employed his drawings in a theatrical setting, was a favorite children's toy. In 1872, Nast moved his growing family to an attractive home in Morristown, New Jersey, which he called Villa Fontana. There were by now 4 children, 3 daughters and a son. His second son, Cyril, was born in 1879. Nast's home, replete with the paraphernalia of children and the tributes of an appreciative public, epitomized the prominence that he had achieved at the tender age of 32.
Well, that is a silver vase 3,500 officers and men of the Army and Navy gave Father for his work during the Civil War, and it shows Father having a medal pinned on him by Miss Columbia with the Army and Navy troops in the background.
The period of the 1870s was an exceptionally prolific and successful time for Thomas Nast. His powerful position as a manipulator of public sentiment offered him a pulpit from which he preached the cause of republicanism and rallied support for his party's presidential nominees. But the swift currents that Nast had ridden to dazzling heights of prestige and power were taking a new direction, a direction that he could not comprehend. By the end of the 1870s, the issues of the Civil War and Reconstruction were only a dim memory. The spirit of republicanism had waned, and with it faded the power and hopes of Thomas Nast. Nast's popularity steadily declined throughout the 1880s. Dwindling interest in the issues which Nast continued to advocate, and his inability to adapt to a new American political style created ideological problems for him that proved to be insurmountable. Although he became the publisher of his own unsuccessful newspaper called Nast's Weekly, and the editor of a collection of his own drawings published by Harper's in 1892 as Christmas Drawings for the Human Race, his career was in effect over. Rejected by publishers who had once clamored for his attention, Nast returned to the one creation of which his public never tired.
Father's idea, I'm quite sure, came from the German Kris Kringle, which he interpreted into the Santa Claus as he thought he should look after reading Clement Moore's poem.
'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were all nestled snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mama, in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap, when out on the lawn there arose such a clatter. I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled. His dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
The final years of Nast's life were beset with financial calamities, disillusionment, and the subsequent neglect of his artistic talent. In 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt, learning of Nast's financial plight, offered him the consular post in Ecuador, South America. He accepted the position, but barely 6 months after his arrival, he died of yellow fever at the age of 62.